Finland.
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 Finland!
Finland is Europe's strangest genetic outlier, a small nation whose DNA points not to the west, but thousands of kilometers east into the frozen heart of Siberia. How did a people with barely 10% Siberian ancestry end up reshaping the entire north? At first glance, Finland looks like a quiet northern bridge between Scandinavia and Russia, but beneath that geography lies one of the deepest puzzles in human history. While Swedes and Norwegians speak Indo-European languages and carry the familiar blend of early farmers and steppe herders, the Finns are different. Their DNA is a mosaic of Ice Age hunters, Siberian wanderers, and Indo-European intruders, yet in proportions no one expected. The maternal haplogroups U5b1 and U5b2, traced back to Ice Age foragers, still make up nearly a quarter of Finnish lineages. Indo-European herders brought R1Z 645, but their impact was faint compared to Siberian migrants whose paternal lineage, N1C, dominates Finnish men today. Archaeological finds, from the Ristola site in Lahti to the haunting Levanluta burials, reveal continuity with ancient foragers and surprising surges of Siberian ancestry long after it should have disappeared. And a 2024 nature study placed the Uralic homeland not in the Urals, as once believed, but in Yakutia, closer to Alaska than Helsinki. This genetic paradox shaped everything. Finland's isolation produced more than 40 heritage diseases, making it a global laboratory for medicine. But it also links Finns to a far bigger story, the same Siberian ancestry that helped populate the Americas. Before we uncover how Siberian wanderers rewrote the DNA of an entire nation, don't miss out. Subscribe now. Because here on Stone and Bone, every story takes you deeper into the mysteries buried in our blood. "13,000 years ago, Finland was locked under more than a kilometer of ice. Picture the Empire State Building, then stack 3 of them on top of each other. That's how thick the glacier was. When the ice finally began to retreat, it exposed a raw, hostile land of bare rock, icy lakes, and tundra. Into this wilderness came the first pioneers. They were hunter-gatherers from Eastern Europe, carrying maternal DNA markers like haplogroup U5b, especially its subclades U5b1 and U5b2. These lineages are among the oldest in Europe, dating back to the Paleolithic. Astonishingly, about 25% of modern Finns still carry them. That makes Finland one of the clearest examples of population continuity in Europe, a living link to Ice Age hunters. Archaeology tells us what survival looked like. At Ristola in Lahti, stone tools show advanced microlithic technology. Tiny, razor-sharp blades fitted into arrows and spears, perfect for hunting elk and reindeer. These weren't desperate stragglers. They were innovators, exploiting every resource in a forbidding landscape. Compare this with Western Europe, where Cro-Magnon descendants were already beginning to experiment with farming. In Finland, farming would not arrive for millennia. Instead, resilience meant mobility, precision, and deep adaptation to the land. That choice, to endure as hunters in the far north, became the first thread in Finland's genetic story, one that still echoes in modern bloodlines today. Fast forward to around 4,200 BC. Across Europe, farming was spreading like wildfire, reshaping the continent's DNA. But in Finland, a remarkable resistance took hold. Instead of crops, the people here clung to rivers, lakes, and reindeer. Archaeologists call them the comb ceramic culture, named for pottery decorated with distinctive comb-like impressions. At first glance, pottery suggests farming, but these weren't farmers. They were dedicated hunter-gatherers. Their pottery wasn't for storing grain, but for processing fish oils and seal fat. Analysis of pottery residues shows a diet rooted in aquatic resources, not agriculture. Sites like Kurikki near Oulu revealed just how advanced they were. These weren't isolated bands scraping by. They lived year-round in settlements, tapped into vast trade networks, and imported flint from Scandinavia, amber from the Baltic, and slate from distant quarries. Genetically, they carried signals tying Finland directly to Siberian populations. For nearly 3,000 years, this connection endured, even as farming swept across Europe. By resisting agriculture, they didn't fall behind. They preserved a genetic legacy that would otherwise have been erased. The comb ceramic people weren't simply stubborn. They were guardians of a lineage that makes Finland an outlier even today. But resistance could not hold forever. Around 2800 BC, a new force thundered in from the steppe, the corded Ware culture, descendants of the Yamnaya herders who had transformed Europe. They carried a powerful paternal marker, haplogroup R1a, especially the subclade R1az645, a genetic fingerprint of Indo-European expansion. Elsewhere, corded Ware swept populations aside. In Central and Northern Europe, they replaced or absorbed local groups so completely that steppe ancestry became dominant, up to 70% in places like Poland and Germany. Finland told a different story. The corded Ware impact here was geographically restricted. Archaeology shows it concentrated in the southwest, leaving the rest of the country largely untouched. 3 cultural zones emerged: corded Ware in the southwest, the Giants church culture along the coast with its megalithic stone structures, and the Finnish Lake District, where comb ceramic traditions endured. Out of these collisions came a hybrid, the Kukkainen culture. Steppe migrants merged with forager traditions, producing new customs, but not full replacement. Genetically, Finland absorbed R1a, but never lost its forager or Siberian core. In contrast, Sweden and the Baltic states became thoroughly Indo-European. Finland resisted. Its genetic tapestry became a rare blend: hunter-gatherer endurance, Siberian continuity, and only a faint Indo-European imprint. That resistance is why Finnish DNA looks so unlike its neighbors today. Then, catastrophe struck. Around 2500 BC, settlements across northern Europe collapsed. Archaeologists see the evidence everywhere: abandoned villages, sudden population decline, traces of mass burials. The likely culprit? Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium that swept through the continent long before the Black Death. For the scattered communities of Finland, survival meant something rare and brutal: a genetic bottleneck. Out of all the men who lived in this era, modern Finns descend from just 2 surviving Y chromosome lineages. It's as if the entire male population of Finland was funneled down to 2 threads. That bottleneck reshaped Finland's DNA forever. The isolation amplified certain rare variants, and over time, these became what scientists call the Finnish disease heritage. More than 40 rare disorders, like congenital nephrotic syndrome, diastrophic dysplasia, and aspartyl glucosaminuria, occur at far higher rates in Finland than anywhere else in the world. Today, about 1 in 5,000 Finnish children is born with one of these conditions. For geneticists, this makes Finland a living laboratory. For ancient Finns, it was life paired to the edge. Survive the plague, survive the cold. Better to blend into the genetic mix. Let me know what you think in the comments. Out of that fragile survival came something even more transformative. Between 2000 and 1000 BC, new people arrived from the east, the Uralic speakers. They did not overwhelm Finland in numbers, but they brought something that would reshape identity forever: language and a new paternal lineage. That lineage was haplogroup N1c, still carried by nearly 60% of Finnish men today. Its arrival marks the deepest Siberian fingerprint in Finland. We know this not only from living populations, but from the haunting remains at Bolshoi Oleni Ostrov, a burial site on the Kola Peninsula dating back about 3,500 years. There, Skeletons carried N1C and Siberian maternal haplogroups like Z1, C4, and D4, direct evidence of Siberian migrants pushing into Europe's north. For decades, scholars argued over where these Uralic speakers came from. Some said the Ural Mountains. Others guessed closer to Finland. But a 2024 Nature study shattered that consensus. By analyzing 180 ancient genomes, researchers found the Uralic homeland was far to the east, in Yakutia, a land of permafrost and reindeer herders, closer to Alaska than to Helsinki. This means the ancestors of modern Finns carried with them the same Siberian ancestry that also helped populate the Americas. In other words, Finns today share distant kinship with Native Americans, two branches of the same ancient migrations, separated by continents and millennia. It was a turning point, a small infusion of Siberian DNA, a new language family, and a cultural shift that would define Finland for millennia. The Uralic migrations didn't just bring DNA and language, they carried an edge. Around 2000 BC, something extraordinary swept across northern Eurasia, the Sima-Turbino phenomenon. Overnight, advanced bronze casting techniques appeared from Siberia to the Baltic, spreading faster than any cultural wave before it. The Uralic groups arriving in Finland were part of this revolution. Bronze wasn't simply stronger metal, it was power. With new weapons, tools, and ornaments, these Siberian wanderers held prestige that native groups couldn't ignore. Control of trade routes, access to bronze, and mastery of new techniques gave them leverage that far outweighed their numbers. And here's the paradox. Genetically, their contribution was small, barely 10% of Finnish ancestry today. Yet linguistically, they triumphed. The Indo-European R, one of Z 645 lineages faded, but the Uralic languages endured, eventually dominating all of Finland. It's a reminder that culture doesn't always follow genes. Sometimes it follows technology, prestige, and survival advantage. In Finland, Uralic speakers had all three, and that is why their language, not Indo-European, became the voice of the North. By 1500 BC, Finland had crystallized into something entirely unique. On the coasts, people joined the Nordic Bronze Age, trading with Scandinavia and adopting new metalwork styles. Inland, influences came from Russia, where Uralic traditions held strong. The result was a land divided by culture, but united by ancestry. Populations were small, distances vast, and communities often isolated. Genetic drift took over. In fact, studies show that by this time, nearly all Finnish men descended from just two surviving Y chromosome lineages. That extreme narrowing explains why Finland's DNA looks so unusual today. Rare variants were amplified, while others disappeared completely. This consolidation made Finland what geneticists now call a founder population, a perfect case study for understanding how bottlenecks shape health and identity. While Sweden, Denmark, and the Baltics absorbed layer after layer of Indo-European ancestry, Finland stood apart. Here, ancient forager DNA, Siberian lineages like N1C, and only faint traces of Indo-European blood combined into a profile seen nowhere else in Europe. By the end of the Bronze Age, Finland wasn't just different, it was genetically singular. A frozen experiment in human history, waiting for the next chapter. By 500 BC, Finland entered the Iron Age, an era that forged identities still recognizable today. Distinct groups emerged: the Finnish proper in the southwest, the Tavastians in the interior, and the Karelians in the east. These weren't just tribes, they were the building blocks of Finnish culture. And then came a discovery that put faces to this deep past: the Levenlota burials. Between 400 and 800 AD, dozens of people were laid to rest in a waterlogged spring in western Finland. Their bones, preserved for over a millennium, held secrets that science has only recently revealed. DNA from Levenlota stunned researchers. Several individuals carried unusually strong Siberian ancestry, far higher than anyone expected for Iron Age Europe. One woman's genetic profile was closer to Siberian groups like the Nganasan than to her Scandinavian neighbors. Yet, she lived and died in Finland, part of a community firmly rooted in the north. This wasn't a distant echo. It was living proof that Siberian ancestry persisted in Finland long after it had vanished from the rest of Europe. These burials became a human link in the chain, a reminder that Finnish identity was forged not just from migrations, but from endurance. But there is another piece of the puzzle, one that makes the North even stranger. The Sami, often called Europe's last indigenous people, once roamed across much of Finland. Today, they live mostly in Lapland, but their genetic legacy tells a story of deep divergence. Sami DNA shows some of the strongest Siberian signals in Europe. Autosomal studies place them closer to Siberian and Nganasan groups than to any Indo-European population. Their maternal lineages are dominated by haplogroups V and U5b, together making up nearly 90% of Sami-MT DNA. On the paternal side, they carry both N1C, the Siberian marker, and R1A, tying them to Eastern Europe. Linguistics confirms it. The Sami language split from Proto-Finnic around 3,300 years ago. In other words, Sami and Finns are cousins who went their separate ways, divided by geography and history. Archaeology suggests Sami once lived far further south, but were gradually displaced northward as Finnic-speaking populations expanded. Today, the Sami remain distinct. Their DNA preserves older Siberian ancestry in even stronger doses than Finns, while their culture and language echo a survival strategy that endured against incredible odds. Together, the Finns and Sami remind us that Northern Europe was never just Europe. It was, and still is, a crossroads between the West and the Siberian East. Which story captures your imagination more? The Sami, who held on to their Arctic way of life, or the Finns, who spread their language and culture across Europe's north? Share your thoughts in the comments. By the 12th century, Finland stood at a crossroads. To the west, Swedish kings and the Catholic Church launched crusades into the region. To the east, Novgorod and Orthodox Christianity exerted influence. What followed was not just politics and religion, but a reshaping of Finland's genetic map. Swedish colonization had its strongest impact along the southern and western coasts. Farmers, traders, and soldiers arrived, intermarrying with locals and leaving behind unmistakable genetic traces. Y-DNA haplogroups, common in Scandinavia, began to appear, especially in the West, where they make up more than 30% of male lineages even today. But this influence did not spread evenly. In eastern Finland, Uralic and Siberian components remained dominant. Even centuries later, geneticists can distinguish east from west. Western Finns carry more Scandinavian ancestry, while Eastern Finns preserve a heavier share of ancient Uralic and Siberian DNA. Religion mirrored this divide. Western Finland leaned Catholic, later Lutheran, while the East leaned Orthodox. Culture, faith, and DNA all followed the same invisible border. What began as medieval crusades left a legacy etched into the genomes of modern Finns. Today, Finland is small, just 5.5 million people, but in genetics, it looms large. Scientists call Finns a founder population, shaped by ancient bottlenecks and isolation. That makes their DNA unusually clear to study. The result? Finland is home to over 40 rare heritage diseases, from congenital nephrotic syndrome to diastrophic dysplasia, occurring at rates far higher than elsewhere. Roughly 1 in 5,000 Finnish children is born with one of these conditions. What was once the cost of survival through ancient bottlenecks has become a global resource for medical research. To harness this, Finland built one of the world's largest genetic databases, FinGen. With over 500,000 participants, nearly 10% of the entire population, it gives scientists unparalleled insight into how genes shape health and disease. Pharmaceutical companies worldwide now rely on Finnish DNA to test treatments and discover links that would be hidden in more mixed populations. But the genetic story is not just for scientists. Everyday Finns taking consumer DNA tests often find unexpected results. Tiny percentages labeled East Asian or Siberian. For many, it's a shock, yet it's the echo of those ancient migrations. The same N1C paternal lineages and Siberian maternal markers first seen in burials like Bolshoi Oleni Ostrov thousands of years ago. Finland today is modern, high-tech, and global, but in its DNA, it remains a living time capsule, a population that carries whispers from Ice Age hunters, echoes of Siberian wanderers, and the scars of medieval crusades. Finland's DNA is not just a local curiosity. It's a missing link in the global human journey. The same Siberian ancestry that left its mark on Finns also shaped the peoples who crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. That means Finns today share distant kinship with Native American populations, both carrying echoes of ancient Siberian wanderers who once roamed the tundra. Linguistically, too, Finland stands apart. Nearly every language in the European Union is Indo-European, except two, Finnish and Hungarian. Both belong to the Uralic family, rooted in the East. Their survival is extraordinary proof that culture does not always follow genetic numbers. Even with limited ancestry, Uralic languages achieved dominance, defying the Indo-European tide. And in Finland's culture, that survival is celebrated. The Kalevala, Finland's national epic, is filled with myths of endurance, struggle, and triumph against hostile forces. In many ways, it is a mirror of the genetics, a people who refused to vanish, who absorbed waves of change, but never surrendered their core identity. So when we look at Finland, we're not just seeing a modern Nordic nation. We're seeing a bridge between continents, a living archive of Ice Age hunters, Siberian migrants, Indo-European warriors, and medieval crusaders, all woven into one small population that refused to be erased. From the glaciers of the Ice Age to the trade routes of the Bronze Age, from the plague that nearly extinguished them to the Siberian speakers who gave them language, the story of the Finns is one of survival against the odds. Their DNA should have been swallowed by Indo-European waves, but instead it became dominant. This is the paradox of Finland, a nation that carries only fragments of Siberian ancestry, yet speaks a Siberian tongue, a people so isolated they created diseases found nowhere else, yet so connected they preserve echoes of the same ancestry that reached the Americas. In every Finn today lies a fragment of Siberia, a whisper from the Ice Age, and a reminder that even the smallest nations can guard humanity's greatest secrets. If this story fascinated you, like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Stone and Bone, because every week we unlock another hidden chapter of humanity's past.